Welcome to Chapter 11, and in this chapter we're going to focus on differential analysis and product pricing. I'm going to skip over this. So first, what is differential analysis? Well, as managers, quite often you are faced with a set of choices. Option A, option B, maybe even option C or D, and you've got to decide. If you can't take all of those at the same time, what's going to yield the best result for the company. And that's a process that is referred to as differential analysis. So differential revenue is the amount of increase or decrease that's expected from a particular course of action. And by the same token, we have differential cost, which would be the increase or decreased of costs associated with that, with the particular choice. And then differential profit or loss would be the difference between the incremental income and differential, I should say, income and loss gives you your differential profit. So we're going to jump right into a brief example here. We've got Bryant Restaurants, and they're trying to decide whether to replace some of its customer seating with a salad bar. And I'm going to just jump over. And so what you see here is a 3-column format. We've got revenue and costs associated with both alternative 1 and alternative 2. Then if you look in column 3, we've got the difference, the differential effect of alternative 2, which is represented in column number 3 here. And the next couple slides kind of have a wordy explanation, so I'll just kind of talk it through while I show you the graphic, because I think it is a bit easier to understand. We've got 20,000 more in revenue with alternative 2, and then we've got an additional 5,000 in costs associated also with alternative 2. So that's going to give us a net differential impact of $15,000 to the positive. And so, as I said, this is kind of a wordier analysis from what I just talked through. And so over time, basically, you want to revisit this analysis, because just because it, looked this way at the outset when you were projecting it, did that really come to fruition in the way that you intended? And so it could be that your actual revenue and expenses differ from what your theoretical projections were when you conducted the differential analysis. And so here are a variety of ways that we can utilize this concept. Are we going to engage in leasing or selling equipment? If that is what we do, is it more profitable for us to retain title to the equipment and just lease it out to customers, or is it better for us to just sell equipment outright? Are we going to continue an unprofitable segment? Is it really unprofitable? And you can see sometimes on the surface something might appear to be unprofitable, but it actually covers a fair amount of overhead, so we may not want to discontinue it. Do we make a part that we might need, or do we buy it? If we were manufacturing something that would then get shipped out, is it more cost effective for us to manufacture the packaging for this versus buying it from a vendor that manufactures boxes and packing material? Do we replace an asset, or do we fix it if it's not operating correctly? Do we process something further, and I'll get into this a little bit more, or sell it kind of in its initial form? Do we accept a special order, which might come with a shift that we need to make in our operating based on what we would be doing? So here's an example, lease or sell. We're a company, we invested in this big piece of equipment that we're not currently using. Are we going to use it in the future? Kind of, probably not. But we spent a fair amount of money on this. Is it more profitable for us to just sell this and hope that somebody else can use it for the rest of its useful life? Or do we retain title to it and do we lease it out and have people use it for just, shorter bursts of time and then take it back at the end of the lease period, release it to somebody else? What's going to be more profitable for us? And we would use the differential analysis in making that decision. So assume that on June 22nd of this year, Marcus Company is thinking about leasing or selling the equipment for the $200,000 equipment, which we have taken $120,000 in depreciation against. So it's got a book value to us of $80,000. And alternative one is to lease. And we think that total revenue for the 5-year lease would give us $160,000. We're going to have to be repairing it because we still have title to it during that time, and we may have some other related expenses, and we think it's going to have zero value at the end. On the other hand, we could just sell it outright and potentially pay a commission to a broker for selling that item. Here is our 3-column format where we examine which of those we want to, which might produce a better result for us. And so we can see that right off the bat, we're going to lose $60,000. We're going to have $60,000 less in revenue by selling it than if we were to lease it out. On the other hand, what it will cost us to lease out is more than what the costs associated with selling it will be. So in the end, our differential impact of selling the equipment actually, if we choose option 2 to sell it, we lose $31,000 as a result. So we are better off to lease the equipment, despite the added costs associated with doing that. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, hey, you didn't talk about anything related to what we paid for this item, the costs, and you would be correct. And why is that? Well, regardless of the alternative we choose, we can't rewrite history. So what we paid for it, the depreciation that we've taken, that's all in the past, and that's referred to as sunk costs. And what you don't want to do is make a decision based upon sunk costs. So, and that's pretty much a universal concept, and often kind of the path to not good decision making, if you were to incorporate sunk costs in that. And I'll give you sort of an example. I was going to sell a car, and I decided, I really ought to have the brakes redone. I really ought to replace the tires, and it will sell for much more. So I then have the work done. I put the car out, put a sign on it, and I get phone calls. Now, I was trying to essentially recover not only what I thought was the fair market value of the vehicle, but I wanted to make sure that I at least recovered the cost of the tires and the brakes that I put on it. And I continued to hold out for that price, which of course never came. And I ended up losing better offers because I reached a point where I just needed to get rid of it. I was continuing to pay to insure it, and it was sitting there. And so had I just taken the sunk costs out of the equation and just taken the best offer that I could get within that short period of time, I would have been better off than trying to, it's referred to as chasing sunk costs, trying to recover what I had spent. Often we are faced with a decision of whether or not to discontinue a segment of operations or a particular product or model that we're making. What we want to not lose sight of is that there is a portion of our costs, our fixed costs, that we have allocated to that segment or that product or whatever it is. If we discontinue that segment, the other portions of our enterprise are going to have to absorb those. So it isn't just that we lop off that product or that segment, and if there's a loss associated with it, we suddenly stop losing money. In fact, we have to figure out how our other segments will absorb the fixed costs that had been attributed to the product or segment that we get rid of. Here we've got the Battle Creek Cereal Company, and 3 kinds of cereal, and you will notice right away that one of these is losing money, $11,000 for the year ended. And if you're a manager, you might, if you hadn't taken this class, say to yourself, what are we making bran flakes for? We should just stop making bran flakes because we'll be better off if we don't make bran flakes anymore. But there are a portion of our bran flakes that are covering our overhead costs. So we've got total fixed costs associated with the production of our goods of $220,000, of which $20,000 is allocated to bran flakes. In terms of our fixed general overhead costs of $51,000, $6,000 of that is allocated to the bran flakes. Now, if we just stop making bran flakes, our corn flakes and our toasted oats are going to have to absorb that $26,000 in fixed costs that's been allocated to the bran flakes. The fixed costs don't just disappear if we stop making the item, because again, they're fixed, and this is just how we've allocated them. We're still going to incur them whether or not we make a single bran flake. So what are we going to do? We're going to continue making bran flakes, or are we going to stop making bran flakes? Well, column 1 is we're just going to continue. Those are the numbers from the previous slide, just sort of condensed. You see that $11,000 loss if we keep making those bran flakes. Column 2 is we're going to stop making the bran flakes. So now we have no more revenue. We have no more variable costs because those are the ingredients for bran flakes, but we're still going to incur those fixed costs if we don't make the bran flakes. So over here, the differential effect of not making bran flakes anymore, the difference between alternative 1 and alternative 2, is a $15,000 loss if we stop making bran flakes, believe it or not. So despite the fact that we were losing $11,000 while we were making the bran flakes, if we stop making the bran flakes, then that's actually going to result in a bigger loss than if we had just continued on using the losing the $11,000 by making bran flakes. So this is one of those ways where, you know, looking at something on its face might seem really obvious. Well, it's losing $11,000. We just won't make those anymore, and then we won't lose $11,000. But in fact, because that product is absorbing some of our fixed costs, we will do worse without the revenue from that to help offset some of those fixed costs. So now, do we make a component or do we buy a component? And we can use this in a variety of industries. And this reminds me, I had a friend when I was in college, and her dad owned a manufacturing company and had a hard time getting the packaging and ended up buying his own packaging company. And then he not only supplied the existing company with packing materials, but then was able to sort of go into the packaging business on top of that. But you've got to conduct a differential analysis to know whether or not that's a good move or not. And so we've got an example here that an automobile manufacturer has been purchasing instrument panels for 240 bucks. They operate at an 80% capacity, no major increases in production in the future. And so here is the cost per unit of the panels. So here's our 3-column decision-making format. Making the panels, alternative 1, where it's going to cost us $280. And note that we've allocated $68 in fixed costs, which we're going to allocate to the panels regardless of whether we make them or buy them, versus the purchase price of buying the panels for $240. By the time we've added the fixed costs, those are costing us $308 per panel. So in the end, despite the fact that buying the panels on its face might seem cheaper, by the time we have allocated our fixed costs to the panels, it's actually more expensive to buy them than it is to make them. I had hoped to kind of finish all of these examples on this one video, but I'm mindful it's getting long, and so I'm going to stop this video here and go on to the next one with discussing replacement of equipment.